Hey guys, it's Drake, and today will be the continuation of my Rare McCarthy's video. And the continuation is my rare Gaddises, or my, Gaddis collection, or whatever you want to say. Um, I would say overall, up, current day today, March 14th, 2022, Pi Day. When I'm recording this video, as of today, my two favorite writers overall, above all others, contemporarily or otherwise, are Cormac McCarthy and William Gaddis. And I do have a collector's spirit. I think I get it at least from my my grandparents, and I'm sure further back. Although I do try to manage it, I try not to get too crazy, although my books have definitely gotten out of hand somewhat. But I try to keep them more focused on what's most important to me. And William Gaddis is certainly one of the most important writers to me. So starting here, this is the edition that I first read Gaddis in. This isn't the exact copy. My exact copy I had didn't have like a glossy finish. It was kind of a more matte finish. And I carried it around with me so much, and I left it in my car in 110 degree Texas heat, and it melted somewhat. The glue on the back, on the spine, melted. So it's pretty fragile, and I try not to mess it up too much. I have that one packed away in a box. But nonetheless, this is the edition, the Dalkey Archive edition, with the introduction by William H. Gass. And I do have to say, I really like this edition. This might be, apart from what I'm about to show you, my favorite, just because it has a young William Gaddis on it, when he was in Spain, I'm pretty sure. I don't really care for the Gass introduction. It's not bad. At least it's by someone who knew him and not by some random person telling you why it's not hard or something like that. But yeah, this is what got me into William Gaddis in 2015. 2015, like I think maybe January or February of 2015 was when I bought the Recognitions, which is kind of hard to believe. So anyway, that starts us off there. And then just to continue with this theme of copies I got, this copy of the Recognitions might be my favorite cover. And then to combine it with these, I call these the Teals, the penguin Teals. And this is a copy of JR that I like. There's another set that Penguin does with Andy Warhol covers, and I don't especially like those at all. I like these much more. This is a picture of a stock, and then this Northern Renaissance painting fits perfectly. And then I'll just go through his works one by one. So right here, I have a first edition of the Recognitions, all the way back in 1955. And in case you're curious, the way you know it is a first edition and nothing else is, it'll say first edition there. If it's not a first edition, it says like B464, which I think means it was published in April of 1964. I think there's a paperback that came a little earlier, but yeah, anyway, there's another hardcover that's a second edition hardcover, or second printing hardcover. But yeah, so I like this one. It has the worm eating its own tail, the dragon eating its own tail. And part of the reason I got this when I got out of university. And along with McCarthy, I think one of the reasons I like them so much and appreciate them so much is that they symbolize to me that, art isn't totally corrupt and bankrupt and unambitious and at least in English, decaying literary art. And I think that's one reason why these books are such a symbol to me, and why I think that, because it's not always valuable to buy first edition. I mean, it's kind of interesting, especially if they're really cheap or hardcovers or whatever. But for these books especially, for McCarthy and Gaddis, what sticks out to me is the fact that they were published. The fact that they were even published is a reminder not to be pessimistic in a way, at least for me. I had a friend recently ask me, like, what books would I recommend to read along with the Recognitions? And I will say, when I read it, when I first read it back in 2015, I didn't read it along with anything. I didn't have any supplementary materials. I don't really put too much stock in supplementary materials or preparatory materials or anything like that, because at least for me, a good quote: if a book's not worth reading twice, it's not worth reading once. And with that assumption in mind, it won't really matter a whole lot if you read it the first time with relatively little preparation, in the sense of background reading and reading guides and guides to the illusions and all this stuff. Because you read it the first time, you get your impression, you get your unmolested impression. Oh, bad use of that, but and then the second time when you read it, you can know what you need help with, what you're looking for, and then you can get the guides and you can really dig into it, because you know how quickly you need to read, is kind of the way I look at it. Because I've noticed a lot of people get really hung up with reading too fast or reading too slow, which can both be extremely detrimental to the reading of a book. Because books aren't paced for you in a sense. Movies are paced for you. Theoretically, you can change it to slow it down or speed it up, whatever, fast forward or rewind or whatever, but you're not really supposed to. And it's set at the speed of time that the director chose or editors chose. Music, same way. You can change it a little bit if you're playing the music yourself, and in the same way also painting is pretty much decided for you. You can decide how long you look at it, but it's an image, so there's nothing stopping you from seeing it all at once, which kind of removes the time dimension too. Not to say you can't look at a painting too long or too shortly, but with books especially, it's on the reader to read it at the correct speed for them. And at least in my experience with a book like The Recognitions, if you read it too quickly, you're basically going to miss everything. Unless you're a really sophisticated reader, maybe you've been reading good books for 10, 20 years, and you're reading it and you feel comfortable with it, which I would say usually is not the case for most people who run across The Recognitions. Well, some people it is the case. And then on the other hand, though, if you read it too slowly, if you try to catch all the references or try to put all of the plot points together and make sure you know every single character at any given time, I think that can also be detrimental. Though I do think it's better to read it slower than fast. For me, myself, I think, well, the way I read it is, I started reading it and I just read it my normal speed. And I got about halfway through, I think about 400 pages, 450 pages or so. And then I realized I wasn't getting enough of what I wanted to out of it, but I knew it was there. And so I completely restarted, took out my marker, went back to the beginning and just started it over again. And then from that point, from my first start, I finished the book in about 3 months. Read the whole thing, loved it, Of course, there were some parts where I felt like I didn't totally understand it, missed some allusions, missed some references to books. which is where this comes in. I got into Gaddis, relatively late, I guess, in the sense of, decade-wise. But I got into Gaddis early enough where all of his shit wasn't totally bought out like crazy. So I didn't have to pay too much for this. I got it from Moe's Books in San Francisco. I ordered it online. And I didn't pay too much at all. I think like $25 or something. But this is Stephen Moore's A Reader's Guide to William Gaddis's The Recognitions, published by University of Nebraska Press. And it is an excellent reader's guide. It does everything I want in a reader's guide. It's based on the Gifford annotations to Ulysses. And as you can see here, it gives you a short plot synopsis and gives you notes on different pages. A lot of it is kind of similar to Notes on Blood Meridian as well, which I also love. It just bare bones. It doesn't try to interpret the book for you. It doesn't try to over-explain things. It just gives you references that are more elusive. Stephen Moore really looked into the references that William Gaddis makes, or allusions that you can pick out but aren't easy to find, and he connects them for you. So if you want to use it, you can, and if you don't want to, you can just ignore it. He does also include 3 nonfiction pieces by William Gaddis, which I'll get to later with his rush for second place. But you guys are lucky. This is now online, updated, so it has more information than this has. But myself personally, I prefer the hardcover, or a hard copy, not necessarily hardcover, but just a hard copy. When I'm reading, I don't really like to be looking online for a whole bunch of stuff, especially stuff like fiction. I just kind of got away from it. So I would recommend this. And if you do want to do some background reading, I would really only recommend 2 books. Well, kind of 2 books. First one would be Goethe's Faust and Marlowe's Faust, if you haven't read that one too. But I think Goethe's Faust is definitely exceptional and worth reading on its own anyway. And the translation I prefer is by David Luke, because it's actually good poetry in English. That's the main thing. Both published by Oxford World Classics. And so, I'd recommend Part 1 and Part 2. Part 2 is crazy. I think Faust Part 2 is a book that still is not totally understood by our civilization in the same way that Finnegan's Wake isn't. But anyway, so Faust, and then also The Golden Bow by James George Frazer. Now, if you can get your hands on the full 12-volume edition, I would recommend it, but of course that's a little more expensive and less reasonable. So if you can get your hands on the new abridgment by Oxford World Classics, I would get that one, because it includes the stuff on Christianity that most likely Gaddis would have had access to, which would give you an idea of where Gaddis was coming from in the sense of the mythology of Jesus being also based on the mythology of Mithras and Roman cults and this sort of thing, which is a big part of the Recognitions. So that's the Recognitions. I love that book. And then next, we'll just go in order. I have JR, which was published 20 years after the Recognitions, and for which Gaddis won a National Book Award. And I was lucky enough to find on sale a signed copy. And I kind of wanted to get this to match my copy of Outer Dark paperback that I have signed by McCarthy. In the same way that the fact that these books got published is a miracle, I think also the fact that the authors wrote them, wanted to get them published, in the sense of wanted to get people to read them, and then also connected with the readers, even in a relatively trivial way, like signing a book. But yeah, I don't think it's too silly to say that I feel grateful that I was alive at the same time as Gaddis and Cormac McCarthy, among others. But so yeah, this is a first edition of JR. And JR is made really nicely. It has they call it a red top stain. Oh yeah, you can tell it's first edition. One thing to keep in mind for book nerds is if it doesn't say a price up here, it's the Book of the Month Club edition, which says first edition, but it technically isn't. But you can see red top stain, kind of nice. Moving along, we have Carpenter's Gothic, which was his third novel. Relatively easy to get in the first edition. You don't have to spend nearly as much as you would for first edition of the Recognitions or JR, which have skyrocketed in price since I first saw them. I think back in 2015 when I first saw hardcovers or first editions, they were the Recognitions must have been in like $100, maybe a little more, and then copies of JR, you could find those for $30 to $40 for a nice first edition. Now the Recognitions is hard to find, under $500, and then JR has been scooting up there too, I think going for about $200 to $250, which is pretty crazy, let alone signed copies of his works. You know, that he's not quite as rare as a McCarthy signed copy. Well, the thing is, I'm sure Gaddis signed copies are more rare. It's just that McCarthy's popularity and his popularity in the sense of being known as a reclusive author, even though McCarthy was much less reclusive in his older age than people put on. But anyway, Carpenter's Gothic. Still haven't read this one yet, but I'm looking forward to when I do. A Frolic of His Own. And funnily enough, the one I bought has Mr. Difficult by Jonathan Franzen in it, cut out. I don't have the Rebuttal by Ben Marcus, which I prefer. But yeah, it's kind of funny. And one interesting thing, you see this artwork here? You'll notice if you look on the back, jacket illustration by Sarah Gaddis. So who is Sarah Gaddis? Must be related to William Gaddis. Sarah Gaddis is Gaddis's daughter, who also wrote a novel called Swallow Hard. And if you look, you see the picture on the front there. And if you read what it's about, I haven't read this one yet, but you might notice some connections. At the center is Roland Tompkins, born on the 3rd of December, 1955. The daughter of an aspiring Southern actress and a writer of great ambition and pride, Roland will be forced to find her own way in a dazzling but often unreliable world peopled by artists and patrons and their various supporters, the most crucial of whom are two men. Her father, Lad Tompkins, so lost in his imaginary world that he often cannot see his wife and child standing beside him, for whom impossibly high standards and lavish critical attention will never lead to commensurate financial success. Who does that sound like? 1955 stands out as a particular year too. That was the year that Gaddis's daughter was born, Sarah. So interesting. Maybe some connections there. And then his last work, which is published posthumously, Agape Agape, which I love. I was just reading it the other day and, just so appreciative and in awe that, Gaddis was actually alive. And you can just read his thoughts and actually connect to it. So, Agape Agape, from good old Thrift Books. And then his last book of published writing of his, The Rush for Second Place, which is his collection of essays and occasional writings. That was also published posthumously by Penguin. Introduction by Joseph Tabby, I think. Tabby, I'm sure it's Tabby. And The Rush for Second Place is an excellent essay, pretty long essay, on failure in the American novel. And you also see here, Agape Agape, The Secret History of the Player Piano, early 1960s. And then Stop Player, joke number 4. Gaddis stayed on the same topics for such a long time, but he never made them repetitive, which I hold as a standard as well. Thinking through something very deeply, and then also making sure you're making progress at all times. So that's A Rush for Second Place. You recognize the name, Joseph Tabby in 2015 put out this book, Nobody Grew But the Business, on the life and work of William Gaddis, which is an excellent, excellent biography. He very tastefully analyzes Gaddis's work, but then also gives you all the extant information about Gaddis's life. Doesn't overdo it, doesn't overinterpret, no ridiculous Freudian analysis of anything, which I'm very grateful for. Just kind of gives it to you straight, and always gives you thoughtful readings on Gaddis's books. Also, one of my favorite pieces of Gaddis criticism, Fire the Bastards by Jack Green, who wrote this book in a journal he self-published in the 60s after he read The Recognitions. And basically it's a total lambasting of the critical establishment in the United States at the time, and it continues, of course, through today. And the sad thing is that Gaddis made fun of it in The Recognitions, and he knew it was accurate because it happened to him. People not even reading the book, people reading the book and not understanding it and blaming that on the book rather than on themselves. You see this on innumerable YouTube reviews of books, print reviews of books, electronic reviews, digital, whatever. And it almost makes you just not even want to get into it yourself. One of the problems I have with this channel is I don't want to be becoming one of these fucking idiots that has horrible reviews. But yeah, anyway, highly recommend Fire the Bastards by Jack Green. It's just so much fun to read. So much fun to read. And then the last book I have to mention is The Letters of William Gaddis, edited by Stephen Moore and afterward by Sarah Gaddis, both names who are familiar to us. This painting is by Julian Schnabel, who is a painter that Gaddis liked late in life, a younger painter who Gaddis really appreciated and artistically supported, just appreciated his work. Luckily, this book is being reprinted, I think later this year, later 2022, because for a while it was very expensive. Like most of the other stuff, I got into it kind of in a good time where it wasn't totally bought out like crazy yet, published in 2013. But yeah, it's just really nice. If you really like Gaddis, it's really nice to read his letters from each part of his life. Growing up and then through The Recognitions, he really corresponds a lot with his mother, Edith. And that's nice to see. Also his friends, Martin Dworkin, who corresponded and spoke to Gaddis quite a lot in the 40s and 50s while Gaddis was writing The Recognitions, and a lot of their conversations between each other Gaddis transcribed and in one way or another put them into The Recognitions. And then JR, of course, when Gaddis is working in corporate jobs, corporate America, and uses that as an influence. Of course, he has children too by this point. And while he's writing JR, his children are growing up and getting out into the world themselves. So that's definitely a big influence. and so on and so on. But I would say getting his letters, if you really like William Gaddis, if you want to learn more about his books. I'm not really one of those people that says reading a writer's work is irrelevant or useless or doesn't contribute anything, as long as you have reasonable expectations about what it can do. If it came down to it, I would rather read the original works than a biography or than a study of the author. And I think especially modern academia leads you in the opposite direction, that it would be better to read a study of all the author's works than the actual works themselves. There's no incentive not to do that, or there's no incentive to read the original works on their own first, necessarily. Even though a lot of people might say, oh yeah, you should read the original works first, of course, duh, but it's not even incentivized in and of itself in academia, so, because you usually end up commenting on other criticism rather than commenting on the work itself, unless you get more into linguistics or philology type readings of things, historical linguistics, that sort of thing, which I appreciate a lot. But anyway, yeah, this was just kind of a run through of the books themselves rather than what's in them necessarily, but you know, a lot of people thought the McCarthy one was interesting, and for anyone just getting into Gaddis because of the NYRB reprints, if you want to really get into Gaddis, hopefully this video gives you an idea of what you should look out for to be buying or reading, because this is my Gaddis collection. This is all I'm gonna buy unless something comes out later that is excellent. Anything I didn't show you in here is stuff I don't have. So yeah, let me know what you thought. Let me know if I missed out on anything. Yeah, hope you enjoyed. Death is a gang boss.